Ramses II, you know him as Ramses the Great. His name echoes through 3 millennia, a symbol of absolute power and incredible ambition. This was the builder pharaoh, a warrior king who ruled Egypt for an astonishing 66 years. His legacy is literally written in stone, from the giant temples of Abu Simbel to the sprawling courts of Karnak. Honestly, you'd be hard-pressed to find a corner of Egypt he didn't leave his mark on. He built an image of himself as a living god, a king destined for eternity. But the story of his actual tomb, it tells a completely different story. It's a story of grand plans, one catastrophic mistake, and a legacy that was almost completely washed away. Ramses was arguably the most powerful man on earth. He built monuments to make sure his name would never be forgotten. So what if I told you that his most important project, his own gateway to the afterlife, was a total disaster from day one? What if the very tomb meant to guarantee his place among the gods was doomed from the moment they broke ground? Deep in the Valley of the Kings, the sacred cemetery of the pharaohs, Ramses picked the spot for his eternal home. Work on this tomb, which we now call KV7, started early in his reign, showing just how important it was, and this was no small project. At nearly 700 square meters, it was one of the biggest tombs in the entire valley, a massive underground palace meant to outshine the graves of all the kings who came before him. The design itself was a throwback, using a bent axis layout that was popular in the 18th dynasty. This was likely a nod to the golden age of pharaohs he wanted to not just copy, but completely surpass. Corridors and rooms snaked deep into the limestone cliffs, all leading to a massive, vaulted burial chamber. The walls were supposed to be a masterpiece. And while almost nothing is left, the tiny pieces we do have tell us what was planned. They were meant to be covered in sacred texts like the Book of Gates and the Amduat. Think of them as supernatural roadmaps and spells to guide the king's soul through all the dangers of the underworld, so he could be reborn. There were also scenes of the opening of the mouth ritual, a ceremony meant to magically bring the mummy back to life so it could see, speak, and eat in the next world. Every single thing about KV7 was a statement of power. It was a machine for eternity, built for the most famous pharaoh in Egyptian history. But here's the thing, even a god-king like Ramses couldn't control the weather. His grand design for KV7 had one catastrophic, fatal flaw. He built his tomb at a low point in the valley, right in the path of the area's rare, but incredibly violent flash floods. For thousands of years, whenever heavy rains hit the hills above, water has ripped through the valley, turning the dry riverbed into a destructive torrent of mud and rock. KV7 never stood a chance. It was hit by these floods at least 7 times. Water came rushing down the corridors, choking the rooms with tons of debris. The sheer force of the water blasted the beautiful paintings right off the walls. Worse, the constant dampness made the shale rock underneath swell up and crack, literally breaking the tomb apart from the inside out. What was supposed to be a perfect eternal palace was turned into a muddy, gravel-filled wreck. Ramses's grand vision was destroyed by a simple, tragic mistake in location. His ambition had run headfirst into the geology of the Valley of the Kings, and if the floods weren't bad enough, KV7 had another problem. This one entirely human: tomb robbers. Whenever Egypt went through periods of chaos, especially in the later New Kingdom, the Valley of the Kings was basically an open target. The thought of all that gold buried with the pharaohs was just too much for people to resist. We actually have ancient records telling us that thieves broke into KV7 during the reign of Ramses III, and they were just the first ones in. Over time, the tomb was completely plundered. All of the king's amazing burial gear was taken, the original golden coffin gone. An inner sarcophagus made from alabaster was smashed into bits by looters desperate to find anything valuable hidden inside. And these thieves weren't just stealing, they were melting down the precious metals, wiping priceless artifacts from history for good. So the grand tomb, already wrecked by nature, was now being picked clean by human greed. It's a pretty stark reminder that back then, the Valley of the Kings wasn't just a sacred cemetery, it was a hotbed for looting and even recycling, with later officials and kings helping themselves to the goods. The trashing of KV7 kicked off a desperate, centuries-long mission by a few loyal priests to save the one thing they could and replace, the pharaoh's body. They knew the royal tombs weren't safe anymore, so they started an incredible rescue operation. Ancient papyri actually record their frantic moves. First, they rescued Ramses' mummy from his wrecked tomb and moved it into his father's tomb, KV-17, hoping it would be safe there. It wasn't. The looting across the valley just got worse. So they had to move the great pharaoh again. Finally, in one last, desperate attempt to save what was left of Egypt's royalty, the priests gathered up all the mummies they could find. They took more than 50 royal bodies, including Ramses the Great, and hid them all in a single, secret, unmarked tomb high up in the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari. This secret stash, which we now call the Royal Cache TT320, kept the pharaoh safe for almost 3,000 years. When Ramses' mummy was finally found in 1881, he wasn't in a magnificent stone sarcophagus. He was in a plain wooden coffin, a clue to just how rushed and desperate his rescuers were. The king who built mountains for his afterlife had become a refugee, his own body shuffled from one hiding place to the next. For centuries, everyone knew where KV-7 was, but they all thought it was a lost cause. Early explorers, including famous names like Henry Salt and even Howard Carter, took a look inside, but the sheer amount of flood debris was overwhelming. They gave up pretty quickly and just moved on, writing the tomb off as a hopeless, empty wreck. It stayed that way until 1993, when a Franco-Egyptian team led by archaeologist Christian LeBlanc decided to give it a proper go. They began the massive job of clearing and conserving what was left. And slowly, as they dug through literally thousands of cubic meters of rubble, the real story of the tomb started to come into focus. They found broken bits of furniture, pieces of statues, and tiny flakes of painted plaster. Every little fragment was a clue. By piecing them together, the team could finally start to see how magnificent the tomb once was, and just how violently it had been destroyed. This modern work is what connects us to that past, showing us not just the tomb, but the story of its destruction. And that work is still going on today. The tomb is still being conserved and remains closed to the public. But the story doesn't stop there. One of the biggest remaining mysteries was Ramses' huge, granite outer sarcophagus. Where did it go? For years, everyone just assumed it was lost forever. But then came a discovery that changes the whole story. And it came from the last place you'd expect, a Coptic monastery in the city of Abydos, miles and miles away from the Valley of the Kings. Back in 2009, archaeologists found a big piece of decorated granite being used in the foundation of the monastery. At first, they could only identify the last person who used it, a high priest from around 1000 BCE named Menkaper. But just recently, an Egyptologist named Frederick Peyraudo decided to take a second look. He carefully examined some hieroglyphs that everyone else had missed and found the faint, partially erased, but still readable name of the original owner, Ramses II. This is an incredible find. It proves that after KV-7 was robbed, this high priest Menkaper had the gigantic sarcophagus dragged out of the tomb, hauled all the way to Abydos, and then had Ramses' name scraped off so he could use it for himself. It's stunning proof of just how chaotic things were when even top officials were stealing and reusing the burial equipment of Egypt's most legendary pharaoh. Discoveries like this, happening right now in places like the Valley of the Kings, prove that there are always more secrets buried under the sand, just waiting to be found. And each one can completely change how we see the past. If you think these stories are as incredible as I do, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can join us on our next trip into the ancient world. The story of KV-7 is just full of irony. Ramses the Great commanded a huge empire and vast armies, but he was completely powerless against a flash flood and the simple passage of time. He tried to build for eternity, but his own eternal home was a failure from the very beginning. The ruin we see today is a stark monument to the limits of even a pharaoh's power. The wild journey of his mummy and the recent discovery of his stolen sarcophagus piece together an amazing story of destruction, desperation, and ultimately, survival. It shows us that history is never really a finished story. It's more like a puzzle where new pieces are always turning up, and it makes you wonder, what other secrets of Egypt's greatest pharaohs are still out there, buried, just waiting for that one discovery